Hello everyone, I'm Suresh Marru at Indiana University. Along with my colleagues, we are here to present a case study paper on user-centric design and evolvable architecture for science gateways. This is a multidisciplinary research effort by myself and my colleagues at the CyberInfrastructure Integration Research Center, Suresh Marru, Tanya Kuruvilla, Aroma Abayasinghe, Donald McMullin, and Marlon Pierce, and in a collaboration with the Electron Microscopy Center at IU, David Morgan, Steve Tate, and Roger Ennis. The three of us, myself and Tanya and David, are going to share these findings with you today. First, let me introduce CyberInfrastructure. CyberInfrastructure is a collection of complex computers, data storage devices, data collections, scientific instruments, and people's expertise, all combined and made usable for purpose of scientific research, computational science research. Science gateways, on the other end, as the user-facing elements of this cyber infrastructure, abstract out these details on how do we access and use cyber infrastructure and focus on how do we enable science-centric views on this, so that the research community can get their research done without worrying about the nitty-gritty details of finding access and using the cyber infrastructure elements here. And the gateway middleware, which enables the science-centric interfaces with the science-centric user interfaces with the cyber infrastructure, is a complex system by itself. And today we are going to talk about these two aspects. How can we make these science-centric science gateways very usable, as well as design the complex gateway middleware so that they could evolve? First, my colleague David is going to describe the Electron Microscopy Center. We'll introduce the Electron Microscopy Center and describe the goals and motivation for our work here.
Hi, my name is David Morgan. I'm the staff director of the IU Bloomington Electron Microscopy Center. Our facility maintains 5 electron microscopes and all the sample preparation equipment necessary to run them. The data we collect is very, very dependent upon the user and the microscope, but it can range from a few images collected within, say, a 15-minute time period, which is a few hundred megabytes of data, up to multiple terabytes of data recorded during automated data collection on 24-hour, 48-hour runs with some of the microscopes. We serve about 50 to 75 different principal investigators in a typical year, PIs, and perhaps as many as 3 times that number of individual users. The users are typically people who are only here for a few years, so undergraduate students, graduate students, postdocs. We do have some research staff, research faculty, and PIs who actually run the microscopes themselves. And so they would be here and use the equipment over a much longer period of time. The users all tend to have some sort of collaboration. The collaboration itself can be within a PI's group. So a student collects data that multiple people are interested in. We have collaborations that are between different labs on the IU Bloomington campus. And then, of course, there are collaborations that stretch across the world. When I came here about a dozen years ago, one of my biggest concerns with the modern generation of electron microscopes and basically all scientific equipment is that they're very, very, very deeply computer embedded. And so you don't want users causing computer problems. And one thing that many, many facilities have done to prevent that is simply to not allow users to plug portable hard drives, flash drives into the equipment associated with the microscopes and eliminate at least that route for viruses or other bad things to get into the computer system. I had worked out a extremely time-intensive and manual way of transferring data from the instruments to the users who needed it, But with the advent of big data, these terabyte data sets, everything that we had in place suddenly got much, much harder. So we've been working with several groups on a gateway type of approach to the problem, and I'll lay out the reasons we want a gateway and what that does for us. So one of the first things that the gateway we're designing does is it deals with the issue of long-term data management. So places like NSF and NIH now require labs to have data management plans, and by creating a gateway that archives the data on a semi-permanent, at least, basis, we can solve that issue for all of our users. The gateway itself is accessible from anywhere that has an internet connection. So you can be any place on the planet with an internet connection and access data that has been entered into the gateway. One of the big motivations for the gateway is the fact that it can be designed in a way that's friendly towards this type of big data that I described. These terabytes of information that are reduced enormously in size in the final analysis, but originally are enormous. And so the gateway helps prevent moving that data multiple times to reach a final location. It goes into the gateway, and if you're thinking ahead, you simply take it out of the gateway once and do the data reduction there. So it's very convenient that way. Because the gateway is accessible across the web, any type of collaboration that you need to do is enhanced. Your lab mates can see it, your boss can see your data, your collaborator in Australia can see the data, and the gateway is designed to allow that type of sharing easily at a level of sharing particular bits of data, for example. The gateway is built around a searchable database, and so you can always go back in time and figure out that you don't remember exactly when you recorded some data or what you named any of the data sets, but you can say, show me all of my data recorded in a 6-month period between this start date and this end date. And so that's very convenient when you have to go back and look at data that's 5 years old, or you're a PI and you're looking for data that a graduate student collected who's no longer in the lab. So it offers a real advantage that way. The final thing that we think the gateway is going to be very useful for is that it will allow us to link the data within the gateway to itself. And so a student working on a single project can say, all of the data I collected belongs to this single project, and so if you need to look at my data, you look at this. That same student could have 5 projects and could subdivide the data into those 5 different projects. Another way that this linkage occurs is if you have data that's derived from microscope information, you can also put it into the data. So if you publish a figure, for example, you can have the figure be in the database, but you can also link that figure to the original data that was recorded on the microscope. I'm sure that as time goes on, we'll find many, many other uses of the database. We have spent a lot of time trying to design it and have gotten a lot of input and feedback from users and PIs and people who will be interacting with the database. And so we think that we have a very good, robust design that is going to meet our needs, but also be flexible into the future.
Thank you, David, for the nice introduction to the Electron Microscopy Center at IU. So as David has described, an experimentalist brings a wet lab sample, analyzes it at a various electron microscopes or cryo-EM. These instruments, as David has described, vary in their complexity and accordingly vary in data sizes what they produce. As the data is gathered, our goal here is now how can we make this data set move on to a central storages to the data centers in IU Bloomington Research Campus, and how can we put move them and save them in long-term storages or move them into compute clusters so users could analyze their data sets, or cloud storages. And make all of this accessible by a user-friendly portal or a gateway, and have a complex middleware abstracting all the details from access to orchestration of these various user workflows. So Tanya is going to describe the various user research techniques we have used and how we have taken the designs and outcome of these user-centered designs and bring them back into designing an architecture.
I'm going to be talking about user-centered design in the context of science gateways. Science gateways have witnessed low user adoption, mainly due to poor usability. Improving the usability and making science gateways usable could result in high user adoption. So how could we do this? By understanding the workflows of researchers and developing the science gateway to meet their needs. The case study we are discussing here is one that of image collection by researchers at Indiana University. Researchers study different samples under the electron microscope and use these images later to support their research work. The core of any user-centered design is the design process consisting of research, ideation, design, and testing. The generic design process shown previously can be expanded to the double diamond design process that consists of two diamonds signifying the divergent and convergent parts of the problem framing and problem solving phases. The first diamond symbolizes the research phase. The diverging part shows how multiple research methods are employed to gather insights around the user needs and the business objectives. And the convergent part shows how research insights are derived from the collected information. The second diamond symbolizes the design phase. The divergent phase shows how different ideas are generated to address the problem space, and the converging phase shows the design solution that's finally chosen based on different criteria. So what is good design? When an MVP or a minimum viable product can be created with a cross-section of functionality, reliability, usability, and the emotional aspect, the product could be called a well-designed product. Going into the specifics for this case study, we first conducted the user research. The main methods we employed were interviews, remote shadowing, affinity mapping, and usability testing. Using these methods, we interacted with researchers who would use the gateway eventually. From the research conducted, we designed the workflow of researchers of how images are collected and how these images are later accessed by them for their research purposes. We then moved into the design phase. In the slides following this, we'll be looking into examples of what the before and after designs look like for downloading images, sharing images, and interacting with image collections. Downloading images. Before user interviews, we assumed users downloaded images to a single location. After user interviews, we provided a way to choose multiple locations to download data, since users store data in multiple locations. Sharing images. Before user interviews, we assumed sharing happened with individuals and groups. After user interviews, we understood that users could be a part of multiple user groups with their team members. So we introduced groups where the user could select groups to share with. Images within collections. Interviews showed the importance of the image file type, such as JPEG, TIFF, etc. This helped them make important decisions about the type of image they may need for their research purpose. A new feature. We added a new feature that we did not account for previously: virtual collections. Virtual collections is a way for researchers to create groups within groups. This was uncovered during the user interviews, where we noticed users sharing folders of folders with team members. Thus, with the help of the UX process, we were able to change the work processes of researchers in the following ways: ease of downloading and sharing images to empower collaborations, addition of features such as virtual collection to reduce dependence on cloud storages such as Google Drive and OneDrive, and reduction in the usage and dependence on external hardware.
Thank you, Tanya, for the description about all our user-centered design aspects. So now let me finish this talk by describing how did we take the outcomes from the user research, take those designs, and how did we implement them, and the architecture and some decision making we had to do in developing an evolvable architecture. The first and foremost, as we discussed during the motivation, we first need to ingest the data and move it into various storage devices. So for this, we have leveraged, first of all, the Airavata security services, branded as called Custos. So Apache Airavata Custos services provide the identity management, secret management to various storage devices, and also provides authorization services so that we can make those decisions. So as the user logs in into the user interfaces, they authenticate with the Custos services and get authorization tokens. And those authorization tokens are passed on to an API server, which upon authorization will interface with various storage devices, get user storage credentials, and then contact the data orchestrator. And the data orchestrator gets this orchestrates the data movement using Apache Airavata's managed file transfer services, moving from the source of where they come from the instruments into various storage devices. And as the data is moved and replicated across the storage devices and cloud storages, they are recorded. Each replica is recorded in a replica catalog, and user will be able to provide access to all these replicas. And as the data is entering the system, a set of data workflow parsers as the workflow components are act upon the data, extract metadata sets as key value pairs. They could be the user provided metadata sets. They could be at an observer entered metadata sets about the microscope and the microscope setting, or automatically machine parsable metadata extracted from the images and other binary data. Using various sets of parsers, we extract those metadata sets and curate them in a metadata catalog. Now, all of these curated metadata sets, metadata, and the data themselves and the various replicas are accessible by the users. As Tanya has described, we have learned about various user workflows. What do researchers do once they observe these data sets? They either download it in an efficient way so that they could use the various tools on their local computing infrastructure to analyze them, observe them, extract the images and learn from them, or move them into a compute storages and analyze them. And then a third and important aspect is they would like to share these data sets with collaborators within the university and across the world so that they could all collaborate on large research projects. So the research, to enable all of these functions, one thing we have learned is the user needs will change. And as we do the user research, the way they interact with the system changes. So it was important for us to pick an architecture and follow the well-known architectural principles, which are working with the big cloud scale systems, like from Netflix to YouTube to Google. So we follow the similar principles and use microservice-based concept and cloud-native architectural principles and define the functional component of each service we develop based on the functionality with a well-defined inputs and output. Once each of these services have a defined contract, and those services could be assembled into a larger system based on their need and the functionality by a request response mechanism or various messaging paradigms here. So in this system, as we talked about, it's also important to come up with a user interfaces which could by themselves follow these microservice-like principles. How can we develop these micro frontends? How can we develop this individual user interaction component and assemble that? So for that, the Apache Airavata provides a Django portal framework on which you can construct this individual functional component as various Django apps, and they could be assembled based on the user needs or the functional needs as we've done this. So in this paper, we've talked about these three aspects from our learning in developing this system. First of all, we kind of highlight distributed systems are complex, both in terms of building and using. So the science gateways as a case study, particularly for the Electron microscope, we discussed the challenges and the complexities for this data distribution aspects. And we discussed how user-centered design principles could be employed to address the usability issues so that we could increase user adoption. And also we discussed how cloud-native principles can be applied so that the system and the architecture could evolve over time. For further information, contact our research center, the Cyber Infrastructure Integration Research Center at circ@iu.edu, or you can reach out to me at smarru@iu.edu. Thank you for your time and attention.